Yesterday evening, it was announced that UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson had been taken into intensive care following his infection with the coronavirus. This shocking news startled a lot of people and led to them asking, well, what happens now? That's unsurprising, really, as this isn't a common occurrence. After all, it's been nearly 20 years since the last Prime Minister was incapacitated, when Tony Blair handed over control during a medical procedure. So in this video, we're going to tell you more about Johnson's coronavirus, what's happened and what's happening next. And we're going to tell you who takes over the government and what that means for Number 10's plans going forward. Before we get into it, I just wanted to say that I stayed up all night to make this video possible. So if you'd like to support the channel, we've just announced a brand new season of our pin badges, which includes England, Ireland, Mexico, Poland, Finland, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Japan, Romania and Russia. You can pre-order any of these designs or the full season in our store right now. A link to that can be found in the description. It was initially announced on March 27th that Prime Minister Boris Johnson had contracted the coronavirus. It initially seemed that Johnson's symptoms were only mild, and that after a short recovery period, he'd be right back. However, last Thursday, rumours started circulating that St Thomas's Hospital in London had been preparing a bed for the Prime Minister. Number 10 denied the rumours at the time, saying that Johnson continued to only have mild symptoms, and that if his temperature came down, he'd be back at work the following day when his isolation period was set to end. He was even seen later in the day on Thursday, when he headed outside Number 10 to applaud NHS workers, but the rumours continued. The following day, unable to return to work, Johnson released a video on his Twitter updating the nation on his health.
Although I'm feeling better and I've done my 7 days of isolation, alas, I still have one of the symptoms, a minor symptom of I still have a temperature, and so in accordance with government advice, I must continue my self-isolation until that symptom itself goes. Stay at home, folks. Protect our NHS. Save lives. Speak soon.
The following day, following his election to leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer spoke to Johnson on the phone to discuss coronavirus strategy, where the Prime Minister invited Starmer to attend briefings on the coronavirus the following week. On Sunday, Johnson was finally admitted to St Thomas's Hospital, with Number 10 announcing the news 90 minutes later. In the statement, Number 10 commented that the Prime Minister had been admitted to hospital for tests, and that his symptoms were persistent, a change from previous statements where his condition was described as mild. The following day, at the official press conference, Dominic Raab, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, commented on the Prime Minister's admission to hospital.
As you'll know, last night the Prime Minister was admitted to hospital for tests following advice from his doctor. This was a precautionary step because he continues to have persistent coronavirus symptoms 10 days after first having tested positive for the virus. I can tell you the PM had a comfortable night in hospital and he's in good spirits. He's still in hospital under observation, he's being given regular updates on developments, and he continues to lead the government.
Despite his insistence that Johnson remained in charge, hours later, Raab re-emerged with another update. That's because on Monday evening at around 8:30 PM, it was announced that 90 minutes earlier, the Prime Minister had entered intensive care. This was expected by some, with rumours circulating during the day that the Prime Minister had been on a ventilator since his arrival in hospital to assist with his breathing. Number 10 insisted that this was misinformation and blamed Russian reports for spreading it. Regardless, hours later, Johnson was indeed moved to intensive care, but at the moment, they're saying that the Prime Minister still isn't on a ventilator. Currently, we don't know any more about the Prime Minister's condition or the kind of care that he's receiving in hospital, with the Prime Minister's spokesman merely saying, over the course of this afternoon, the condition of the Prime Minister has worsened, and on the advice of his medical team, he has been moved to the intensive care unit at the hospital. The Prime Minister is receiving excellent care and thanks all NHS staff for their hard work and dedication. Some Conservatives are concerned that this confusing and potentially misleading information coming out of Number 10 could damage the government's credibility on the issue going forward. After all, they've been insisting that Johnson's condition was only mild until the moment he was admitted to hospital, and even then, it appears they downplayed the severity of Johnson's condition. And to some extent, this is all understandable. The government clearly has conflicting priorities here. It has a duty to keep the public informed, but it also wants to maintain calm and reduce stress and panic during this difficult time. But the government is asking the whole country to lock down, something that's not easy for anyone. So they need people on side, trusting the government and following the rules. So that's the real concern that Conservative MPs have. If number 10 isn't straightforward and honest with the people, then the government, and by extension their party, could risk losing the faith of the British people, something that could be damaging for everyone. So, what exactly happens now? Well, up until this point, Johnson had maintained control, continuing to run the country while in quarantine. However, following his admittance to intensive care, it was announced that Johnson would be handing over control. So, what happens when the UK Prime Minister is incapacitated? Well, it turns out the process isn't all that simple. Other countries like the United States have a very rigid process to handle this, with the President handing over powers to the Vice President, who would then pass over powers to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and so on, through 18 levels, all the way down to the Secretary of Homeland Security. The UK doesn't have quite as simple a process. If the Prime Minister is to die or become incapacitated, there are no formal documents in place to outline who would take over. Instead of a long list of people lined up to take over the position, the UK has a so-called designated survivor. This is the person who takes over if the Prime Minister becomes incapacitated. And when the Prime Minister first fell ill, it was announced that the designated survivor was Dominic Raab. Some have been encouraging Johnson to hand over control to him sooner, believing that Johnson should be focusing on his recovery. But regardless, with Johnson entering intensive care, the time finally came for Johnson to hand over, and Raab made a statement to the media announcing that he would be taking over Johnson's responsibilities when necessary.
The Prime Minister's condition worsened, and on the advice of the medical team, he was moved in to a critical care unit. So in light of those circumstances, the Prime Minister asked me as First Secretary to deputise for him where necessary in driving forward the government's plans to defeat coronavirus. Well, the government's business will continue, and the Prime Minister is in safe hands with a brilliant team at St Thomas's Hospital, and the focus of the government will continue to be on making sure at the Prime Minister's direction all the plans for making sure that we can defeat coronavirus and pull the country through this challenge will be taken forward.
So for now, Raab will be in charge whenever big decisions need to be made related to any issue, especially the coronavirus. But it's worth remembering the vast machinery at play when it comes to government. While the Prime Minister may hold various powers and be an influential figurehead, there are huge departments of civil servants, experts, advisors and politicians working behind the scenes, and all these people continue their important work despite Johnson's absence. So I wouldn't expect a sudden change in strategy now that Raab's in charge. Following his hospitalisation, Johnson received hundreds of well wishes from around the world. President Trump commented on the issue.
I want to express our nation's well wishes to Prime Minister Boris Johnson. All Americans are praying for him. He's a friend of mine. He's a great gentleman and a great leader. I'm hopeful and sure that he's going to be fine. He's a strong man, strong person.
And Trump was joined by former Prime Ministers, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, French President Emmanuel Macron, Leo Varadkar, the Irish Taoiseach, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission's President, Scott Morrison, Australia's Prime Minister, as well as by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, and the newly instated Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. We'd like to add our well wishes to that list and say that we wish the Prime Minister a speedy recovery, and we have full faith that the incredible NHS staff will give him all the care that he needs. But it's not just the Prime Minister who's struggling at this point. People, companies and charities are struggling at the moment more than ever. I know that money's tight, but if you have any to spare, it's worth considering how you can help. And there's one charity I'd especially like to shout out. Ross's mum works for St Margaret's Hospice in Somerset, an amazing charity that work alongside the NHS to look after people in their community. The problem is that with their shops closed and with fundraising events cancelled, they're not able to raise all the money they need to stay operational, an issue that's especially painful when they're stretched so hard by the coronavirus. Without this money, they'll struggle to continue their incredible work into the future, and this isn't an isolated incident. If you're able to help, then please consider donating to St Margaret's or local charities and hospices in your area. There is a link to St Margaret's down below, but I'm sure that a good Google search will find a similar organisation nearer you if you'd prefer. Thanks for your support, and thanks for continuing to watch TLDR News. If you want more updates from us as the coronavirus crisis continues, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and hitting the bell icon will mean that you'll get notified every time we release a video. And to get more from us across all social networks, you can just search for TLDR News. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible.